If table 12 is yours tonight, you might as well clean out your locker before sunrise. The whispered warning drifted across the dining room more quietly than the soft piano music, yet it landed with the weight of a verdict. Inside the elegant Wellington House Steakhouse in downtown Seattle, crystal chandeliers scattered warm light across polished oak floors, while floor-to-ceiling windows reflected the city skyline shimmering beneath a light evening rain. Every table had been prepared with flawless precision. Every wine glass sparkled. Every server moved with practiced confidence. But the moment the front doors opened, something invisible swept through the restaurant like a cold breeze. Conversations faded. Smiles disappeared. Even veteran employees unconsciously straightened their uniforms. A black luxury sedan had just stopped outside. Naomi Carter adjusted the black apron tied neatly around her white dress shirt and glanced toward the entrance, confused by the sudden silence surrounding her. She had worked enough evening shifts to recognize the difference between ordinary anticipation and genuine fear. Tonight felt different. Two sharply dressed security professionals entered first, quietly scanning the room before stepping aside. A tall Korean man in an impeccably tailored dark suit walked in without rushing, without speaking, without demanding attention. Yet somehow every eye followed him. Daniel Kong acknowledged no one beyond a polite nod toward the host. His expression remained calm, unreadable, almost detached. The hostess welcomed him with careful professionalism before escorting him toward the most private table overlooking the rain-soaked streets below. Behind the service station, whispers immediately began spreading. "Please do not assign me. I served him once. Never again. Someone else can take that table." Naomi looked from one coworker to another, unable to understand why experienced servers suddenly behaved like nervous trainees on their first day. She quietly asked, "Who is he?" No one answered directly. One waitress simply shook her head while another muttered, "Just pray it is not your section." At that exact moment, Melissa, one of the senior servers, smiled with unusual sweetness. "Naomi," she said, holding the seating chart, "would you mind helping me tonight? I accidentally doubled my section." Naomi glanced at the chart without suspicion. She had covered extra tables countless times before. Helping coworkers had become second nature. "Of course," she answered warmly. "Which table?" Melissa casually exchanged 2 reservation cards before handing over the clipboard. "Just table 12. Another server lowered his eyes. Someone quietly sighed. The bartender looked away as though he already knew how the evening would end. Naomi thanked Melissa and picked up a leather menu, completely unaware that the seating chart had been deliberately changed only seconds earlier. As she walked toward the private dining area, several employees exchanged silent glances that carried more guilt than satisfaction. They had convinced themselves they were protecting their own jobs. If someone had to fail tonight, they had decided it would be the newest waitress. Daniel Kong remained seated by the window, calmly studying the rain sliding down the glass instead of the room around him. He did not look impatient. He did not appear angry. He simply waited. Naomi approached with steady footsteps, a welcoming smile, and the same quiet professionalism she offered every guest regardless of appearance or reputation. "Good evening, sir. Welcome to Wellington House. My name is Naomi, and I will be taking care of you this evening." Daniel slowly lifted his eyes from the window and met hers for the first time. Around the dining room, forks paused above expensive plates. Conversations dissolved into silence once again, and every employee secretly watched from a distance. None of them realized that the real test had never been about serving the most feared customer in the restaurant. It had begun the moment they chose to sacrifice the kindest person on their own team. Naomi Carter noticed the silence before she noticed the man. Years of working in restaurants had taught her that dining rooms had their own rhythm. Glasses chimed softly. Conversations overlapped. Laughter drifted from one table to another. Even on the busiest Friday nights, there was always movement, always sound. But as she stood beside table 12 with a leather menu resting comfortably in her hands, the entire room seemed to hold a single careful breath. Daniel Kong looked up from the rain streaking across the window and acknowledged her with nothing more than a courteous nod. His expression remained calm, his posture relaxed, his voice steady. "Good evening," he said politely. "Good evening, sir," Naomi replied with the same genuine warmth she offered every guest. "May I bring you sparkling water or still water while you look over the menu?" Daniel closed the menu without opening it. Sparkling, please. Certainly. Naomi smiled and walked toward the service station, unaware that several coworkers immediately began watching her every movement. Melissa quietly leaned against the beverage counter with folded arms, pretending to organize receipts while secretly waiting for something to go wrong. Another server whispered, "She has no idea." The bartender answered without looking up, "She never does. She always assumes people mean well." Those words were painfully accurate. Naomi believed cooperation made every shift easier. She regularly traded tables when coworkers felt overwhelmed, stayed late when someone needed help, and covered weekend shifts without expecting favors in return. She remembered birthdays, encouraged new employees, and often left handwritten notes thanking the kitchen staff after particularly busy evenings. Kindness had become such an ordinary habit that she rarely noticed herself doing it anymore. Earlier that same morning, before the restaurant opened, she had stopped at her mother's apartment with fresh groceries on the way to work. Her mother had smiled while folding laundry and repeated the advice she had heard since childhood. Never allow another person's attitude to decide your own. Naomi carried those words with her like a favorite family photograph. They reminded her that character was measured most clearly on difficult days rather than easy ones. Back inside the Wellington House Steakhouse, she carefully prepared Daniel's sparkling water exactly as she would for any guest. The crystal glass caught the warm chandelier light, while tiny bubbles rose slowly to the surface. She placed a fresh linen coaster beside the setting before returning to table 12. Daniel thanked her quietly. There was nothing intimidating about his tone. In fact, his calm manners seemed strangely different from the frightening reputation whispered throughout the restaurant. Naomi noticed he waited until she finished placing the glass before speaking again. "How long have you worked here?" he asked. "Almost 2 years," she answered. "And do you enjoy it?" Naomi smiled honestly. "I enjoy taking care of people. Every table has a different story." Daniel considered her answer for a moment before nodding thoughtfully. "That is an unusual way to describe restaurant service." "Maybe," Naomi replied gently. "But everyone remembers how they were treated long after they forget what they ordered." Across the dining room, Melissa frowned. That conversation was not following the script she had imagined. She expected complaints, uncomfortable silence, perhaps even frustration. Instead, the feared guest appeared completely comfortable. Determined not to let the evening unfold so smoothly, Melissa quietly exchanged a prepared order ticket with another one, while Naomi briefly greeted a nearby family celebrating their anniversary. The wrong entree would soon arrive at table 12, and everyone in the service station already knew exactly who would be blamed. Naomi, however, returned carrying fresh bread with the same calm smile she had worn all evening, completely unaware that the real challenge had only just begun. The kitchen doors swung open with their familiar rhythm as steaming plates emerged beneath warm lights, carrying the rich aroma of grilled steak, roasted vegetables, and fresh herbs across the dining room. Naomi Carter thanked the line cook with her usual smile before lifting the tray carefully onto her shoulder. Everything appeared perfect. Every garnish sat exactly where it belonged. Every plate matched the printed ticket she had been handed only moments earlier. She had no reason to suspect that the order itself had already been changed before it ever reached the kitchen. Behind the service station, Melissa exchanged a quick glance with another server. Neither spoke. They simply waited. Their confidence came from believing that even the calmest employee could not survive enough carefully planned mistakes. Naomi crossed the dining room with steady, practiced steps, weaving gracefully between tables where anniversary dinners, business meetings, and family celebrations unfolded beneath the soft glow of crystal chandeliers. She arrived at table 12 and gently placed the first entree before Daniel Kong. "Your dinner, sir. Please enjoy." Daniel looked down for only a second before raising his eyes again. "I believe I ordered the grilled sea bass." Naomi glanced at the plate. It was a perfectly prepared filet mignon. Her smile never disappeared. "Thank you for letting me know, sir. I sincerely apologize. I will correct that immediately." There was no hesitation, no excuse, no attempt to blame the kitchen. She simply lifted the plate with the same professionalism she had displayed all evening. Daniel nodded politely. "Thank you." Around the dining room, several employees quietly stared. Melissa frowned. "Why is he not upset?" she whispered. Another server shrugged. Maybe he has not realized how many mistakes are coming. Naomi returned to the kitchen, where the executive chef immediately looked confused. That cannot be right, he said while checking the order screen. I prepared exactly what was printed. Naomi examined the ticket for the first time. Something felt unusual. The printed order showed filet mignon, yet she clearly remembered Daniel requesting sea bass. Before she could think further, Melissa stepped beside her with an expression of practiced concern. Oh no, she said sweetly. Maybe you heard him wrong. Naomi looked at her coworker for a brief moment before smiling gently. It is possible. Either way, I will make sure he receives what he asked for. The chef immediately began preparing a fresh sea bass, while Naomi thanked him for the quick assistance. She never noticed the faint disappointment on Melissa's face. Once again, the trap had failed to produce the reaction everyone expected. Minutes later, Naomi returned with the corrected entree. Daniel watched her set the plate down before quietly asking, "Did someone make a mistake?" Naomi met his eyes with calm sincerity. "The important thing is that you now have the meal you requested, sir." Daniel rested his hands on the table and studied her expression carefully. "That was not my question." Naomi paused only briefly. "Restaurants are team environments," she answered softly. "If something goes wrong, guests should receive solutions before explanations." Daniel leaned back slightly, almost thoughtful. Interesting. Nearby diners continued enjoying their meals, unaware that a much quieter conversation was unfolding beneath the surface. Daniel picked up his fork, sampled the sea bass, and gave a small approving nod. "Excellent." Naomi thanked him and excused herself to assist another table where a young boy had accidentally dropped his napkin beneath the chair. She knelt, retrieved a clean replacement before anyone needed to ask, and wished the family an enjoyable evening. Daniel observed the entire interaction without interrupting his meal. He noticed that she treated every customer with exactly the same attention, whether they ordered a $70 steak or a simple bowl of soup. Respect, he realized, seemed to be her default setting rather than something reserved for important people. Behind the service station, Melissa quietly prepared the next stage of her plan by removing the special imported tea Daniel had requested from the serving tray before Naomi returned. She smiled to herself, convinced that one more carefully hidden mistake would finally accomplish what the others had failed to do, while Daniel calmly continued his dinner, watching far more closely than anyone in the restaurant realized. Naomi Carter thanked the family with a warm smile before returning to the service station, completely unaware that another carefully arranged problem was already waiting for her. The polished silver tea service she had prepared only minutes earlier no longer looked the way she remembered. The imported jasmine tea requested by Daniel Kong had disappeared, replaced by an ordinary blend from the regular dining menu. Naomi paused for only a second, quietly searching the preparation counter. She checked the warming station, the serving cart, and the inventory shelf with calm efficiency. Nothing. The special tea had vanished. Behind her, Melissa glanced toward another server and gave the slightest nod before pretending to refill water glasses. The plan seemed perfect. Daniel was known for requesting the same imported tea whenever he visited high-end restaurants. If Naomi failed to provide it, everyone expected the evening to unravel. Naomi gently approached the beverage manager instead of panicking. "Excuse me," she asked politely. "Have we already served the imported jasmine reserve this evening?" The manager frowned while checking the inventory log. "No, there should still be one sealed tin in storage." Together, they searched the cabinet. It was empty. The manager looked genuinely confused. "That is strange." Naomi simply nodded. "Thank you for checking." Without showing frustration, she prepared the highest quality alternative available and carried the elegant porcelain teapot toward table 12. Daniel looked up as she arrived. "I apologize, sir," Naomi said sincerely. "The specialty tea you requested is unexpectedly unavailable this evening. I have prepared our finest jasmine selection instead, but if you would prefer another beverage, I would be happy to bring it immediately." Daniel looked at the teapot for a moment before asking, "Did the restaurant suddenly stop serving the tea?" Naomi could have explained everything she suspected. She could have pointed toward the missing inventory or questioned her co-workers in front of him. Instead, she answered with complete honesty. "I do not know why it is unavailable tonight, sir. I only know that you deserve the best service I can provide with what we have." Daniel slowly smiled for the first time that evening. It was not a broad smile, only a quiet expression of appreciation that almost no one else in the dining room noticed. "Then pour the tea," he said. Naomi served it carefully, making certain every movement reflected the same professionalism she had demonstrated since the beginning of the evening. Daniel lifted the cup, inhaled the aroma, and took a thoughtful sip. "Very good," he said. "Thank you." Several employees, secretly watching from across the room, exchanged confused looks. Once again, the disaster they had anticipated never arrived. Melissa folded her arms, unable to understand why every carefully planned obstacle seemed to strengthen Naomi instead of weakening her. Meanwhile, Daniel continued observing far more than the quality of the meal. He noticed that every time Naomi walked away from his table, she paused to greet another guest, refill a water glass before being asked, or quietly help an elderly couple read the evening specials. She never hurried one customer to impress another. She never changed her personality depending on who sat before her. Everyone received the same respect. That consistency interested him far more than flawless service ever could. Near the entrance, the general manager reviewed reservation reports while occasionally glancing toward table 12. He had also begun noticing something unusual. Every apparent mistake surrounding Daniel's dinner somehow centered on one employee who almost never made mistakes. The pattern was becoming too consistent to ignore. As Naomi collected an empty appetizer plate, she thanked Daniel for his patience once again. He looked directly at her and asked a simple question that seemed ordinary on the surface, yet carried unexpected weight beneath it. "Tell me, Naomi, when something goes wrong, why do you never look for someone else to blame?" The dining room seemed to grow quiet once more as Naomi considered her answer, completely unaware that several co-workers had stopped working just long enough to hear every word she would say next. Naomi Carter looked at Daniel Kong for a brief moment before answering, not because she needed time to invent the right words, but because she believed honest answers deserved careful thought. The gentle hum of conversation throughout the Wellington House Steakhouse seemed to fade once again as crystal glasses reflected the warm chandelier light, and rain continued tracing quiet lines across the tall windows overlooking downtown Seattle. "Because solving the problem matters more than proving who created it," Naomi said softly. "Guests come here to enjoy their evening, not to watch employees argue." Daniel remained silent, studying her expression as though he were listening to far more than her words. "And afterward?" he finally asked. Naomi smiled politely. "Afterward, the team can learn from whatever happened." Daniel rested his hands comfortably on the table. Even if the mistake was intentional, the question caught her by surprise. It was subtle, almost casual, yet it carried enough weight to make her pause. Naomi answered with the same sincerity she had shown throughout the evening. "I would hope no one comes to work planning to make someone else fail. But if they do, I still believe professionalism should come first." Several feet away, Melissa nearly dropped the tray she was carrying. She glanced toward another server whose nervous expression suddenly replaced the confidence they had shared only minutes before. Neither of them expected Daniel to ask questions that reached far beyond restaurant service. Naomi excused herself briefly to refill a nearby guest's water glass before returning to table 12 with fresh bread warmed only moments earlier. Daniel thanked her again, noticing that she greeted every customer with the same respectful smile, whether they wore expensive designer clothing or simple business attire. There was no calculation in her kindness. It never changed according to status, appearance, or influence. That consistency interested him more with every passing minute. Near the service station, the general manager quietly reviewed the evening's digital order log after noticing the unusual sequence of errors surrounding a single table. Something immediately stood out. The electronic record showed that Daniel's original entree request had been modified only seconds after it was entered. Another entry revealed the specialty tea had been removed from inventory without being served to any customer. He frowned and called the beverage manager over without drawing attention. Together, they compared timestamps, inventory records, and security access logs. The pattern became increasingly difficult to dismiss as coincidence. Meanwhile, Naomi noticed an elderly couple preparing to leave after celebrating their 50th wedding anniversary. She thanked them sincerely for spending such an important evening at the restaurant. The husband smiled warmly before saying, "Young lady, your kindness made our celebration even more memorable." Naomi thanked him with genuine gratitude before wishing them a safe drive home. Daniel observed the exchange quietly. "Do you remember every guest?" he asked after she returned. Naomi laughed softly. "Not every guest, but I try to remember every person." Daniel nodded almost imperceptibly. "There is a difference." Before Naomi could respond, the general manager approached table 12 with calm professionalism. "Mr. Calm," he said respectfully, "may I speak with you for just a moment?" Daniel gestured toward the empty chair across from him. The manager remained standing instead. "I believe we have discovered something concerning regarding your service this evening." Naomi immediately looked toward him with quiet confusion. She had no idea what he intended to say. Around the dining room, several employees instinctively stopped moving. Melissa felt the color leave her face as she noticed the manager holding a printed copy of the digital order history in one hand and the inventory report in the other. The elegant restaurant once again settled into complete silence, but this time it was not fear that filled the room. It was the unmistakable feeling that the truth, patient and unhurried, had finally arrived at table 12. The general manager placed the printed reports carefully on the edge of the table without raising his voice. There was no anger in his expression, only quiet disbelief. "Mr. Calm," he said respectfully, "our digital records show that your original order was changed after Miss Carter entered it correctly into the system. We also confirmed that the specialty tea was removed from inventory by someone other than her. The timestamps do not match her activity." Daniel Kong lowered his eyes to the reports, studying every line with calm attention before looking toward Naomi. She stood silently beside the table, her black apron still perfectly pressed, her hands folded neatly in front of her, looking more concerned about the disruption to the restaurant than about herself. She did not interrupt. She did not point toward anyone. She simply waited. Across the dining room, every employee seemed frozen in place. Melissa stared at the floor, unable to meet anyone's eyes. The bartender quietly stopped polishing a crystal glass. Even the soft piano melody drifting through the elegant dining room seemed to settle into the background, as though the restaurant itself understood that something more important than dinner service was unfolding. The general manager continued. "We also reviewed the security cameras covering the service station. They confirmed that Miss Carter prepared every order exactly as requested. The changes happened after she walked away to assist other guests." Daniel nodded once before turning his attention back to Naomi. "You suspected something," he said calmly. Naomi answered honestly. "I suspected the evening had become unusually difficult, sir. I did not know why. Yet you never accused anyone." She offered a gentle smile. "Suspicion is not proof. I would rather solve a problem than create another one." Daniel remained quiet for several moments. His security team exchanged brief glances, but said nothing. Around the room, several guests had quietly noticed the unusual conversation, yet respectfully remained focused on their own tables. The atmosphere no longer carried fear. Instead, it carried expectation. Daniel slowly stood from his chair, buttoned his suit jacket, and looked toward the general manager. "May I ask everyone involved in tonight's service to join us for a moment?" His voice never became louder, but every employee heard him. Melissa and the other servers approached with hesitant steps. Nobody spoke. Daniel looked at each face before finally saying, "Do you know why I choose to dine without making special requests from management?" No one answered. "Because I learn more from ordinary service than extraordinary treatment. Reputation introduces people. Character reveals them." His eyes briefly returned to Naomi. "Tonight, I watched a woman receive incorrect information, missing items, altered orders, and unnecessary pressure. She responded with patience every single time. Not once did she embarrass a coworker. Not once did she allow another guest to experience her frustration. That is rare." The general manager quietly lowered his head, realizing he had almost allowed one of his finest employees to become the victim of someone else's choices. Daniel continued with the same measured calm. "Excellence is easy when everything goes according to plan. Integrity appears when nothing does." Naomi felt every eye in the restaurant turn toward her, yet she remained exactly as she had been all evening. Humble, professional, respectful. She did not look victorious. She simply looked relieved that the truth no longer needed anyone to defend it. Outside, the Seattle rain had finally begun to slow, and the reflections of city lights shimmered across the wet streets beyond the tall windows. Inside the Wellington House Steakhouse, something equally quiet had changed. The carefully planned trap had accomplished the opposite of its purpose. Instead of exposing weakness, it had revealed the one quality no false accusation could ever hide. Genuine character had remained steady through every test, and now everyone in the room had witnessed it for themselves. No one spoke for several long seconds after Daniel Kong finished. The silence inside the Wellington House Steakhouse no longer felt uncomfortable. It felt honest. Crystal chandeliers cast warm reflections across polished tables, while the last traces of rain slid down the tall windows overlooking downtown Seattle. The general manager slowly turned toward the group of employees gathered near the service station. His disappointment was evident, but his voice remained calm. "I expect mistakes in a restaurant," he said quietly. "I do not expect people to manufacture them." Melissa lowered her eyes. The confidence that had carried her through the evening had disappeared completely. Another server took a slow breath before admitting, "We thought if Naomi served table 12, she would lose her job instead of one of us." The confession settled heavily over the room. No one interrupted. No one argued. Naomi looked from one coworker to another with genuine sadness rather than satisfaction. She had shared birthdays with some of them, traded shifts, stayed late to help close the dining room, and covered tables whenever someone needed a break. She had never imagined they believed sacrificing her was the easiest solution to protecting themselves. Daniel observed her expression carefully. There was no bitterness, no anger, only disappointment that people who worked side by side had chosen fear instead of trust. The general manager folded the printed reports and placed them beneath his arm. "We will discuss employment decisions after the restaurant closes," he said. "Tonight our responsibility is still our guests." Naomi immediately nodded. "I can continue serving my section," she said. The manager looked surprised. "After everything that happened?" Naomi answered with quiet conviction. "The guests did not create this situation. They should not experience a different evening because of it." Daniel smiled almost imperceptibly. Once again, she had chosen service before self. As the employees returned to their stations, Melissa hesitated before approaching Naomi. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. "I am sorry." Naomi looked at her for a moment before replying gently. "I hope you mean that." Melissa nodded, unable to say anything more. Naomi did not lecture her. She did not embarrass her in front of coworkers. She simply returned to carrying fresh coffee to another table where two elderly sisters were sharing dessert after attending a local theater performance. She greeted them with the same warmth she had offered every guest that evening. Daniel noticed every detail. Nothing about her professionalism depended on whether someone deserved it. It came from who she had decided to become long before this night began. Several diners who had quietly witnessed portions of the evening began thanking Naomi as they left the restaurant. One businessman paused beside her station. "You handled yourself with remarkable grace," he said sincerely. Another couple complimented the exceptional service before placing a generous tip beneath the receipt folder. Naomi thanked each of them with genuine appreciation, never mentioning the investigation, the altered orders, or the co-workers who had betrayed her trust. Near the entrance, the general manager quietly watched those interactions and realized that reputation could be earned one guest at a time, while trust could be lost through a single dishonest decision. Daniel finished the last sip of his tea before standing once more. He adjusted the sleeve of his tailored jacket and looked across the elegant dining room that had slowly returned to its familiar rhythm. Then he turned toward the general manager. "When your restaurant closes tonight," he said calmly, "I would appreciate 10 minutes with Miss Carter, if she is willing." The request immediately captured everyone's attention. No one knew why one of the most respected and mysterious men to enter the Wellington House Steakhouse wanted a private conversation with the waitress everyone had tried to push out. Naomi herself looked quietly surprised. She simply nodded politely and said, "Of course, sir." Daniel returned the nod before walking toward the exit with his security team. As the front doors closed behind him, the room seemed to exhale at last. Yet everyone sensed the evening was not truly over. The carefully planned trap had already failed, but something far more unexpected was waiting after the final guest left, and no one in the restaurant could yet imagine how completely it would change Naomi Carter's future. The final guests left just after 10:30, and the familiar sounds of the Wellington House Steakhouse slowly faded into the quiet rhythm of closing duties. Crystal glasses disappeared into polished cabinets. Chairs were carefully aligned beneath white linen tables. The soft piano music that had filled the dining room all evening came to an end, leaving only the distant sound of rainwater dripping from the awning outside. Naomi Carter finished folding her black apron neatly over her arm before helping another employee carry the last tray into the kitchen. She worked with the same calm focus she had shown since the beginning of her shift, as though nothing extraordinary had happened. The general manager approached her with a gentle smile. "Mr. Kong is waiting in the private dining room whenever you are ready." Naomi nodded respectfully and walked toward the quiet corner overlooking the Seattle skyline. Daniel Kong stood beside the window with a cup of tea in his hands instead of sitting at the table. The city lights reflected across the wet streets below, creating ribbons of gold and silver beneath the evening sky. As Naomi entered, he turned and greeted her with the same courtesy he had shown throughout dinner. "Thank you for staying." "Of course, sir," Naomi replied. "You asked to speak with me." Daniel gestured toward the chair across from him, but Naomi remained standing until he sat first. He noticed the gesture immediately. "You are respectful even when no one is watching," he observed. Naomi smiled lightly. "Respect should not depend on the audience." Daniel nodded thoughtfully. "That answer explains much of what I saw tonight." For several moments, neither of them spoke. The silence no longer carried tension. It carried reflection. Finally, Daniel placed a small leather notebook on the table. Inside were handwritten observations from restaurants across several states. Naomi looked at the pages with quiet curiosity. Every entry described service, leadership, teamwork, and guest experience rather than food. Daniel closed the notebook and looked directly at her. "People assume I choose restaurants because of reputation. They are mistaken. I visit restaurants because I am searching for people." Naomi looked genuinely surprised. "People. Leaders," Daniel corrected gently. "Menus can be redesigned. Dining rooms can be renovated. Technology can be replaced. Character cannot be manufactured." Naomi listened without interrupting. Daniel continued. "The stories people tell about me are rarely important. What matters is that they reveal how others behave when they believe someone powerful is watching. Tonight, your coworkers revealed fear. You revealed integrity." Naomi lowered her eyes for a moment before quietly answering. "I was only trying to do my job well." Daniel smiled. "Exactly." He reached into his jacket and placed a simple business card beside the notebook. It carried only his name, a direct telephone number, and the logo of an international hospitality investment group. "I recently acquired several boutique restaurants and hotels across the Pacific Northwest," he explained. "Over the next year, I intend to build a leadership training program focused on guest experience and workplace culture. I am not looking for someone with the loudest voice. I am looking for someone whose example teaches others without demanding attention." Naomi looked at the card but did not immediately reach for it. "Why me?" she asked honestly. Daniel answered without hesitation. "Because throughout the entire evening, every challenge was designed to make you think only about yourself. Yet every decision you made protected the guests, your coworkers, and the restaurant before protecting your own reputation. That cannot be taught in a weekend seminar." Naomi remained quiet, absorbing words she never expected to hear. Outside, the rain finally stopped, revealing a clear reflection of the city lights beyond the windows. Daniel stood and offered a respectful handshake. "Take a few days before making any decision," he said. "Opportunities matter. Choosing them wisely matters even more." Naomi accepted the handshake with genuine gratitude. As she left the private dining room holding nothing more than a simple business card, she realized the evening everyone believed would end her career had quietly opened a door she had never imagined. Not because someone rescued her, but because integrity had spoken clearly enough for the right person to hear it. 3 months later, the Wellington House Steakhouse looked much the same from the outside, yet the atmosphere inside felt noticeably different. New employees received more than training manuals during orientation. They learned that professionalism was measured by character long before performance reviews or customer surveys. Team meetings no longer focused only on efficiency and sales. They also included conversations about respect, accountability, and the responsibility every employee carried toward one another. The general manager often thought back to the evening that had quietly transformed the culture of the restaurant without anyone planning for it. Naomi Carter continued working there for several weeks before making the decision that would shape the next chapter of her life. She did not leave because she was unhappy. She left because she believed growth was another form of gratitude. Before her final shift ended, nearly every member of the staff gathered to thank her. Even Melissa stood before her with sincere humility. "You had every reason to make things harder for me," she admitted quietly. "Instead, you chose kindness." Naomi smiled gently. "Kindness does not erase mistakes," she replied. "It gives people the chance to become better than those mistakes." Melissa nodded with tears in her eyes, understanding that forgiveness required far more strength than resentment ever could. A week later, Naomi accepted Daniel Kang's offer and joined the hospitality leadership program he had envisioned. Her role was unlike anything she had imagined. She did not begin by managing luxury hotels or expensive restaurants. Instead, she traveled throughout the Pacific Northwest meeting restaurant owners, training supervisors, and mentoring young employees beginning their first jobs in hospitality. She taught practical skills, but she spent even more time teaching something far less visible. She explained that every guest remembered how they felt long after they forgot what they ordered. She reminded managers that the strongest teams were built on trust instead of fear. She encouraged new servers to solve problems before searching for someone to blame. Daniel occasionally observed her training sessions from the back of the room without interrupting. Every time he watched, he became more certain that his decision had been correct. One afternoon, after a leadership workshop in Portland, he approached Naomi with a quiet smile. "Do you remember what you said the first night we met?" he asked. Naomi laughed softly. "I said many things that evening." Daniel nodded. "You told me guests come to enjoy their evening, not to watch employees argue." Naomi smiled as the memory returned. "I still believe that." Daniel looked around the room where dozens of young hospitality professionals were encouraging one another before returning to work. "You were not only describing restaurants," he said. "You were describing leadership." Months later, the Wellington House Steakhouse received recognition for outstanding workplace culture and exceptional guest service. The general manager accepted the award with genuine pride, but privately, he knew the most important lesson had never come from a trophy. It had come from watching one quiet waitress refuse to let another person's choices determine her own character. On a rainy evening that looked remarkably similar to the night everything had begun, Naomi stood outside a newly opened boutique hotel overlooking Puget Sound. Guests entered through elegant glass doors while employees welcomed them with warm smiles and quiet confidence. She watched for a moment before walking inside, grateful that the values her mother had taught her and the integrity she had chosen every day continued spreading through people she had only recently met. Somewhere beyond the lobby windows, city lights shimmered across the water just as they had months before. The world had not changed overnight. People still faced unfairness, misunderstanding, and difficult choices. Yet one truth remained beautifully constant. Fear may influence a moment. Power may influence a decision. But character influences lives long after every conversation has ended, and genuine kindness always finds the people who are willing to recognize its worth.